Break Fix Podcast is all about capturing the living history of people from all over the autosphere, from wrench turners and racers to artists, authors, designers, and everything in between. Our goal is to inspire a new generation of petrol heads that wonder, how did they get that job or become that person? The road to success is paved by all of us because everyone has a story.
For more than 40 years, Wallace Wyss has lived at the crossroads of automotive culture. First, as a celebrated writer and journalist, authoring 18 car books, including a bestseller, and later in life becoming a fine artist whose exotic car paintings now circulate around the world.
From his early days at MotorTrend to his deep Shelby connections, Wally has chronicled the machines and the people who shaped modern motoring, only to reinvent himself decades later with a paintbrush in hand. Based in San Bernardino and still chasing the stories that move him, he joins us today to talk about the craft, the cars, the creativity, and the unexpected turns that define a life in the automotive arts.
That's right, and joining me tonight is returning co-host Don Weberg from Garage Style Magazine, one of the many personalities on the Motoring Podcast Network. Welcome back, Don.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
And with that, let's officially welcome Wally to Break Fix.
Thank you.
Welcome, Wally.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, Wally, like all good Break Fix stories, there's a superhero origin story. You've been quoted as saying, "I've been a writer for over 40 years that accidentally became an artist." So take us back to the moment when you first chose writing as your path, especially automotive writing, and what drew you into the automotive world specifically, and what kept you there for 4 decades.
I'm glad we didn't get into age, so I don't know how that would work, because then I start saying I was born before television. I was born before computers. And when I was a kid, you went down the train station, you had a choice of steam locomotive or... And then I was thinking the other day, it's something that really blows my mind. I have to figure it out with the pencil. But when I went to a Veterans Day parade, guess what war the veterans were from? The Spanish-American War. You know, like they must have been born in the 1800s, you know, or else they knew people born in the 1800s, and those people they knew people in the 1700s. So it's like, here we are, 2026. It's hard to believe that I knew people who talked to people who were 2 centuries ago.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But I'm trying to disguise it as well as I can. Another job I had in high school was cleaning swimming pools. So one time I'm at this guy's house in Birmingham, Michigan. He has the Corvette Stingray prototype in his driveway. A few minutes later, the Mako Shark shows up. A few minutes later, something else. So turns out he's a design chief of GM, Bill Mitchell. And so I got to talking with him, and I hung out with him for a while and went to his job, and he would drive me on a little race course they have there. And he gave me his opinion of this and that. And so I was just really enamored of the creativity of that field, but I never really did, I got into it with my fine art, but I never got into it where I could affect the cars. And by the way, another great thing about living in Detroit was they have a museum there, art museum. They have several rooms of one painting, continuous mural by Diego Rivera, and it's the Ford factory. And my father worked there at 32, building Model A. So I always wonder, is he this guy tightening the wheels, or is he this guy over here? Because Diego Rivera would make all the workers look alike. That really sparked the back half of my brain. The front half said, oh, you want to design cars? But the back half said, no, leave the cars aside. Go to art, fine art. First, I started at Wayne State in Detroit as a art major, and I was kind of just an average artist, didn't have any particular style. But then I was a poet a little bit. So one time I'm in the library looking for a new book on poetry, and I saw a British sports car magazine. I opened it up. There's a 3-page story on the Iso Grifo A3C race car, which was made in Italy but had a Chevrolet engine. And that picture, even though it was black and white, it was so stunning that right there, I forgot everything about poetry, didn't care about poetry anymore. I came out of that library saying, I got to get involved with cars. And then a little while later, some ad agency scouts came and said, we're looking for summer interns. Who wants to be an artist? I raised my hand. And they said, oh, we already got an artist. Okay, who wants to be a writer? And so right there, I switched my major and became an ad writer, writing kind of the modern version of See the USA in your Chevrolet. And I was in advertising for like 5 or 10 years before I moved to California.
What agency were you working for?
Campbell Ewald was the second one. The first one, I think it's called DP Brother. That was an Oldsmobile account. I'm kind of embarrassed that I worked for accounts where the marks have disappeared since then, but I guess they didn't do the right car at the right time.
Don, it seems like when we look at Wally's resume, you two share a publisher in common. Both of you spent some time at MotorTrend.
Yeah, are you still in therapy too, Wallace? Are you still in therapy?
Well,
I'm still in therapy for my tenure there.
I actually worked for it in two different places. I worked in Hollywood Boulevard, and that was kind of a crummy little building. It probably used to be a porno theater or something. And then I came back a few years later, and when I worked at Car Life magazine in 1970, the art director tipped me off, hey, they're going to shut down this magazine. So I rushed over to Hollywood, and I had more chutzpah in those days. I just walked in, called the personnel department, and said, oh, I'm the new guy at MotorTrend. The editor didn't even know who I was. They sent me the paperwork, I signed it, and suddenly I was working there. And I don't have the nerve to do that now, but that was great to work on that street because it was a street called Sunset Strip, and all these movie stars and rock stars would celebrate their signing of the contract by driving some exotic car. And several times I tried to buy the car, but sometimes by the time I found out what it was too late. I missed my chance. I'd follow them to their house and put a check in the mailbox.
Yeah. Yeah, the Sunset Building was really neat. You're right, though, with a crummy building.
Yeah. I do have one more story, though, about working in that street where the famous people were. I was on the 6th floor. I looked down. I saw a yellow Ferrari P3/4, like the kind that raced at Le Mans.
Mhm.
Just a full race car going down the street. And for some reason, I didn't want to take the elevator, it'd take too long. So I ran down 6 flights of stairs. I go out into traffic and I stopped the guy. And I said, I need to take your picture for magazine. And he turned out he had bought the car and converted it to street use and was having a blast with it. It turned out that he was not only a good-looking movie star type, but he was a movie star, and he was a rock and roll star, and his father was Dean Martin. And so I got the story in the magazine, and then the real sad part was he didn't live to enjoy it that long because he volunteered for the Air Force to be a fighter pilot. And then the airport said, okay, you can fly at 5,000 feet, but they didn't mention it was 8,000-foot mountain in the fog. So I thought, well, that guy really lived the life as much as he could.
From there, you went into the world of writing automotive books. And in your bio, there's 18 book credits to your name. So what started that journey? Because that's a whole different thing than just, writing ads or writing articles.
Well, that started with picture books. I was doing for Classic Motor Books, it was called, in Wisconsin, run by a British man. And what I did was I would do these picture collections and captions. And believe it or not, I could write the book in one day because it's just like 80 or 90 pictures with the captions. And I would even fly over to like England and go to Jaguar or something and say, can I look at the files? And walk in with an empty suitcase, walk out with a full one. That became the book. But then I started thinking about Cobras and Shelbys and all that. And then I was mulling that in my brain. And then what happened was, it's just by accident, I actually lost my job at the second magazine. First it was Car Life, then MotorTrend in Hollywood. I was back in Detroit doing advertising, editorial work. I'm walking down the street and I hear a roar and I look up and I see this 427 Comp Cobra with a big wide fenders, big wide tires, and a woman is driving it and she's sliding around the corner and everybody's panicking. So the horse of the mounted policeman was bucking, and I was debating whether to help with the horse because I actually was a cowboy for a little while. But then the lady happened to pull up next to me, and she said, "You, which way is Cobo Hall?" That's the convention center. I said, well, I'll show you if you give me a ride. So she opens the door of the Cobra. I get in, strap myself in. She takes off again, top speed. I said, you're going the wrong direction. But anyhow, I corrected her. 5 minutes later, we were at the convention center. Just as I got out of the car, Carroll Shelby comes up. So I introduced myself. And then I thought, oh, he's approachable. So then I contacted this publisher and said, I want to do a book on the Ferrari. He said, oh, there's too many books on Ferrari, but there's none on the Cobra. So I said, oh, well, okay, that's an American engine, but I was kind of snobby already. And so that's how it happened. And the book sold 50,000 copies.
So I want to pull this thread. Who was the lady behind the wheel? Was she a celebrity?
I know her name, Pat Maroney, Merone, but I never checked on what happened to her since or how she did in racing. But that's the PR genius of Shelby, was to say, because he told me personally, the 427 will kill you in a second. If you don't know what you're doing, it's just too much power. But yet having a woman drive it at these different occasions made it like, well, maybe it can be tamed. So it's kind of like having a pet lion.
Well, you sort of buried the lead here as we dig into your career. You've had a long connection with the Shelby world, and part of the 18 books you've written, 3 of which are on Carroll Shelby and his life and his cars. So you described how the relationship began. So as you dug into his story and you met a living legend, you worked with a living legend, what do you think most people misunderstand about the man, the cars, and the Shelby culture itself?
I think he was a real deal maker at heart. I mean, of course, he loved cars and he loved airplanes. He had plenty of both. But when push came to shove, some design that they worked on for years that was going to revolutionize the car industry, that would disappear. Like there was one called the Lone Star. That was, pretty sure it was front engine. But anyhow, it was just his assistant, Al Dowd, told me once I had to crawl across the gas tank to get to my bucket seat, I lost interest in it. He didn't want to be in a high performance car sitting on top of the gas tank. And so anyhow, I was shocked that Shelby would develop a prototype and then it would be gone and it'd never be mentioned again. So he always was preparing for the next meeting with Ford executives. Shall I pull the bunny out of this pocket or that pocket? And what would they go for? That's the way he operated, and you just had to get used to it. If you were working on one of those projects that he canned, well, too bad for you. Like Pete Brock, the Daytona Coupe with the 427 engine. That would have actually perpetuated the Daytona Coupe into another year of racing. But then Ford thought, well, wait a minute, what if it beats the Ford GT, which is their baby?
Mhm.
It had to go.
I just got to dig in here a little bit. 18 automotive books with a 4-part series, The Incredible Barn Finds, the highly entertaining stories behind 50 treasured cars, published in 2013. How did you become the barn finder guy?
You want the actual barn finding or the writing about them?
Both.
Yeah, start with that and move into the other one.
Okay, I was at a convention. It wasn't really in Washington, D.C. It was in like Virginia. I mean, just a few hundred feet away from Washington. Went to a Ferrari convention and talking to everybody. One of the funny things was there was some illegal gray market boxer there. And there was some ultra enthusiast engineer from Detroit who ended up being in charge of catching the gray market car smugglers, the cars that weren't really legal. And he was like prowling around. If that car leaves this hotel property, I'm going to grab it, for the U.S. government. And so that was interesting to me that I was dealing with the hunted species. And then I found out this New York man I met who was a landlord in downtown Manhattan. He loved Italian cars, and so did a lot of his friends. And I don't know what occupations they had, but one of them made some food. I can't remember what it is now, but a real popular thing. But they would meet every week in New York, and they would sit around the table, and they would say, and now I'm going to imitate a New York accent, much to your horror, but one of them would say, hey, yeah, what do you got? You got anything new? And then they'd say, yeah, I got a Ghibli coming in from Chicago. What color is it? Yellow. Is it 5-speed? No, it's an automatic. Within 5 minutes, they decide which of the group is going to get it. And then somewhere out in the road in Indiana or something, 2 reliable trucking semis would meet and then unload and then move the yellow car from this truck to that truck so it could go to the new guy. So anyhow, when I heard that, I said, well, I can look around out on the West Coast and see. So then I started advertising in Auto Trader. And I would always show a picture of a scruffy car, not a clean one that would win a Concours, kind of dirty. And then I would say, I want this car. It doesn't matter if it runs, if you got a clear title, call me. And then my wife at the time worked for American Airlines. And that old slogan of the airline employee, marry me, fly free. So I would go home and say, oh, I need a ticket for Kokomo, Indiana tomorrow. My technique was to go out there and knock on the door, not even call them first, because the flight wasn't costing me anything. I'd knock on the door and they'd answer, and I'd say, this is the check with your name on it, cashier's check. Let's go see if the bank will cash it. I didn't say, let me look at the car. Let me check the engine. Let me check for rust. I said, this is a check with your name on it. And 90% of the time I succeeded. I mean, some car club people were really mad that I just blew it out of nowhere, didn't know the seller and didn't know the car, but I had the check that would cash.
This is like something Eric would do. Eric would totally do something like this. I could just see him doing this, you know.
Now it wouldn't work so well because of the internet. There'd be gossip about me in the internet. Watch out for this guy, Wally, you know. Oh, and now it's about writing about him. What happened was there was some other book, I can't remember the series, but another book about rare cars that were hidden. And so I kept trying to upstage myself and find a car that you could not have guessed when you saw it, what was underneath it. But if you did guess right and then rebodied it in its correct configuration, you'd have $1 million car. And I think out of all of them, my favorite is the 250P or 250LM Ferrari, a full racing car that I think won Le Mans in 65. So some guy was racing in Switzerland and he crashes it. And then he's sitting there like, what am I going to do? I called the Ferrari factory. They refused to make a new body. That's an old car to them. So as he's sitting there, this guy comes up and says, well, how many meters long is it? And he tells him, and he says, you know, I got a Porsche body that will fit on that if you cut the nose of the tail off a little bit. So they did. And they called it the Poor Fair. And I thought that's where the American collectors really miss it. They didn't look at this obscure little series in Switzerland where a real 250LM Ferrari was racing. It just didn't look like a Ferrari. So that'd be a real shot in the dark to guess that one.
So is that the kind of cars and stories that are included in the Barn Find books?
Yeah, the main type of stories I was trying to do is how a car was neglected for a long time and nobody knew what it was. And back before the computer, you weren't able to do the homework in 15 minutes and find out about the cars. And I'm still looking for one now. I'll tell you about the one that eluded me. It was so close and I missed it. It's my favorite car. It's called the Bizzarini. It's an Italian car, Corvette engine. So I worked at MotorTrend magazine in Sunset Strip. There's one of these at a car lot across the street. So you think if it's because it's my favorite car, am I going to walk over there and look at it? No, because it was charcoal gray. I didn't like the paint. It didn't have the right rear window. But now I realize that that car was put together of two smashed ones, the front half of one, the back half of the other. So if you had that, theoretically, you could build a new front for the existing back, and for the other one, you could build a new rear. You'd have two cars for one. But now it's 50 years later. Who knows where that car is? It could still be sitting in the San Fernando Valley. So that's one of my favorites. That who would guess? And why didn't I go look at it?
So the premise behind the series is these are unrestored cars that you're looking for. You're legitimate barn finds.
Yeah. And then sometimes people would rebody a car because at the time it seemed like a good idea and the manufacturer didn't want it anymore. But then years later, the body they put on it wasn't so appealing. And then the smart guy checked the serial numbers and said, I'll build the original body again.
So, Don, this reminds me of a story you told me a while back about the Bugatti in the barn, I believe is what it's known as. Wally, are there some cars in that book that if somebody was picking it up for the first time would really shock them, like something like the Bugatti in the barn?
I don't even remember all the cars that are in it now, but there's several cars in that book that are more valuable now than they were then because there's more education on the cars and more. Actually, you know who has some of the best cars? Like this one Cobra that was, I don't know if it was bodied by Gia, but it's got a different body. I think a 427 chassis. But in Detroit, these automakers would donate the concept cars. I mean, after a while, you know, your garage gets full, 50 concept cars. So you'd call up the Detroit Historical Museum across from the Art Museum and say, hey, would you like this car? And hey, they're not going to turn it down. So now the sad thing is their museum is way too small to show more than 2 or 3 cars. So they've got them in storage. At least they're protected from rust. But I mean, that story happens over and over again where a real connoisseur gets the car, but he can't keep it anymore. So he donates it. And then who knows where it goes from there. You have to have good records.
You know, and that's a great segue into something I know is a very passionate subject for you, which is car design. You kind of alluded to it with the Bizzarini. Part of what you've written about over the years is all the design changes and the evolution in the car world. So I want to get your take, now that you're looking back over 50 plus years in the automotive space, what your thoughts are on car design.
Well, sometimes I'm elated with some new prototype, and then Most of the time I'm not, because I can remember something way back that was a lot better. Like the new Rolls Royce, they have one, it's called the Nightingale series. The price is so bizarre in the press releases, from 1 million to 30 million, and each car will be individual. But it's like I can remember one from 1970 that I like better. So I'm constantly in turmoil. I can barely embrace the new one when I think, but that old one was so good. And I'm a frustrated car designer, and I do write critiques of new cars that came out. And this one former GM designer keeps writing critiques of my critiques and says they're not critiques, they're analysis. And I looked up critique and it says you say some good things, you say some bad things. That's what I do.
So if you were to pick top 5 most beautiful cars,
Near the top would be the Alfa Romeo 33. It's some coupe that actually copies about 90% of the old one, but they still screwed it up in the details, like the headlights trim and stuff like that. But just to capture that shape, I would say it's as good as the Bizzarini shape. And by the way, when I came across this French word called louche, I think, Louche, I really like that word to describe this, because that means a beautiful woman that's got a little too much makeup on. You know, you don't want to take her home and introduce her to her mother. I mean, that car is like wicked looking.
well, if we're staying with the classic cars, you mentioned one. So your top 5 most beautiful cars of all time, because this is a question we actually used to ask guests quite a bit. What's the sexiest car of all time, or what's the most beautiful car of all time?
Well, the Aston Martin DB4 GTZ, Aston Martin Zagato. I remember when an owner couldn't get rid of it compared to a Ferrari, and it's worth a lot more than most Ferraris. Well, Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud convertible Series 3 with the 4 headlamps. Monteverdi had a one-off, Palm Beach, I think it was called. And that was a Swiss car with the Chrysler engine. And then the 427 Cobra with the wide body. I think I'm up to 5.
And I find it interesting that you have chosen 5 cars that no one else has ever selected. You know, we get a lot of E-type Jags and 250 pontoon fender Ferraris and stuff like that, as that, you know, Coke bottle shape, if you will. So really interesting picks you have there. But I think there's an opposite side to this design question, isn't there, Don?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Yes, because we understand that you have a connection with Jerry Weigert and the Vector. Is that right?
I was a friend of his, and I wrote a novel which didn't go anyplace. I didn't find a publisher for it, and I only self-published a few. But that was about a small entrepreneurial car developer like DeLorean or like Weigert. And so I kept comparing in real life. Every time I met Jerry Weigert, I'd ask him something, and what he would tell me would, oh, that's so good for my book. And now that he has died, I found some more scandalous things, which I might put in the book if I ever publish it or not. But I got to admire his pluck, though. He came from Bad Axe, Michigan, and came out to California and developed his own car and actually got to where a few were sold. But he never compromised and sold it to another company. He tied in with the Indonesian company, but in the end, he ended up with the car again. He was like Shelby, but he was going for high tech all the way, even though the real high tech world was outpacing him far ahead of where he was at.
Since you're sharing celebrity stories, one you told me off camera was about Roger Penske. You want to share that one too?
I would love to tell that at a party if I'm ever near him. Maybe I'll have to look for him at Pebble Beach. But as I was working this ad agency, I'm driving along my Opel, and I see Roger Penske on the sidewalk looking perturbed. And so I pulled over and I said, "Hey, Roger, what's wrong?" He said, "Somebody took my Corvette and I want it back." And I said, "Well, hop in." And we're driving around. We only drove for a few blocks and we saw a cop, and he pointed at the cop and said, "Somebody took my Corvette. I want it back now." And the cop said, "Yes, sir, hop in." So he goes over to the police car and goes away and gets his car back. But I thought that's what made him a business success, maybe a billionaire, that he didn't have to explain who he was. "I want it back. You know you took it. I want it." You know, and I thought he's going to go places, that boy.
You said you were driving an Opel. Was it an Opel GT?
No, a Manta, I think.
Oh, that's a shame. Because if you had been driving a GT, you could have told him, "Roger, I took your car to get washed and it shrunk when it came out the other side."
He has a big publishing company now. I think they published one very lavish car magazine.
So as a connoisseur of car design, Wally, how would you critique the Vector?
It was a very bold design for the time, but I don't know wind tunnel wise how it came out. I thought it was the ultimate wedge, so it was probably pretty good. But when you get to those cars up past 180, Sometimes just a couple inches difference here and there can cause a lot of trouble. And that's actually what happened with the first Muras. When they got them out there, it was way faster than they had ever planned for. And now they're overdoing it the other way. We're making a lot of exotic cars look alike because they want to get good aero number.
Let's take a little pit stop. And for those that are watching this episode behind the scenes on our Patreon, they'll notice that you are wearing all white. And apparently this is one of your signature styles. There's a story behind why you're wearing all white. Isn't that right?
Yes, what happened was during that first time I was with MotorTrend, I'm not sure it's the first or second time, but anyhow, I went to a bookstore in Hollywood and they had this writer from New York in his 30s or 40s wearing all white with a white hat. And he was Tom Wolfe, who later became real famous. I think he wrote that book that became a movie about the astronauts. But that first book was called The Candy Colored Tangerine Flake Streamlined Baby, about custom cars and George Barris and all that. I invited him to lunch and nobody was buying his book. Nobody knew who he was. So he said, okay, I'll go to lunch with you. And during lunch, he admitted that he wasn't really in the car world, that he lived in New York City. So he didn't really relate to cars that much. But his mind was so blown by the custom cars that he had to write a story for Esquire. But then he couldn't get the story written. He couldn't get his mind around it. So the editor of Esquire just said, that's okay. We'll just take your letters and that will be the story. And so that became the story and that became the book. And he always wore white. And so then I started wearing white years later and all kinds of good things came of it. Like one time when I was at Pebble Beach, walking with my wife past this big mansion, they were having a party and they yelled out and said, oh, we're over here. They thought that I must be a celebrity coming to their party and I was lost. And so I come in and I meet the governor, Schwarzenegger, and all that. I never explained that I wasn't going to their place. But I feel good when I wear it, and it's a tip of my hat to Tom.
You look good. You wear the white well. Not many people wear all white well, but you seem to pull off the Clorox look very well.
I'm still trying to work out the walking. There's a certain way of walking that I just can't get it down. Like when you walk that way, then everybody cleared. Here comes the boss.
Yeah, it's a swagger.
Yeah, I just can't do it. I go into, little old man mode.
I'm just wondering, in your painting, in your work, do you still wear the all white? Does it go with you everywhere? I mean, what do you do there?
Oh, when I show the paintings, I'm even going to a show this Sunday in La Jolla, and that'll be the right atmosphere, the ambiance, right by the ocean and all that. So I'll wear it, but I'm going to wear them at different shows because then people who bought one of my paintings before will come up and say, well, what do you got that's newer? Kind of continue the conversation from 3 years ago or something.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of funny because Ben Collins, better known as the Stig on Top Gear, his book is called The Man in the White Suit. So not to also be confused with the Del Monte commercials from the 70s. So, we'll leave that where it is. All right. Well, let's come back from our pit stop and carry on with your chronology, Wally. As mentioned in the intro, you have self-described becoming an artist as something that accidentally happened. Let's go back to that turning point when you realized that painting exotic cars and what we consider today classic cars was becoming your second career rather than a side experiment.
Well, that happened because I had done the third Shelby book, and I knew they were going to have this parade, not a parade, but kind of an informal concourse on Rodeo Drive, one of the fanciest streets in the United States. I thought, well, I'll bring a few of the books and then I'll bring the painting. I made a painting of Shelby. I said, I'll leave that in the car, just show people pictures of it. So the first guy I sold a book to, I said, oh, by the way, I got this portrait of Shelby here. He said, go get it. You sold that too. And I thought that was a good sign because he didn't say how much is it. So as I'm walking back from the car, I thought, you know what? I think I'll be an artist.
You talked about going to school for writing, and when you changed careers, did you go back to school to become a fine artist, or did you learn all this on your own?
Believe it or not, I was just at a print shop. And before, I never liked real oils because the linseed oil smelled so bad. But now people who paint oils told me, oh, they use a different brush cleaner now. It doesn't smell bad. But how fast it dries. That acrylic oil dries in seconds, and that paper is good. And so once I got all that together and I learned how to take the right pictures, I do sort of tend to shoot the front 3/4 and rear 3/4 views a lot. But each car kind of tells me how it wants to be shot. And I throw a lot away. I think I'm throwing about 50% of my pictures away because it's just either the right car at the wrong angle or I got the car too realistically and you see its flaws. All I have to do is learn how to make copies. I don't want to sell the original. Then I bought some paint supplies and then did more and more of them, but I do only sell the print. Like this is a print.
Wally, do you do commission work? In other words, could somebody hire
Oh, yeah.
you?
Yeah, that one of them was a museum owner in Georgia or someplace. You could tell where he got the money because he owned a water company. I mean, what could be better to own than a water company?
That's the best.
And he had 100 cars, and he started reading off the list. And when he got to 275 GTB4 Ferrari, I said, "Is it red?" And he said, "Yes." That's okay. I'll do that one. But sometimes it's a challenge because maybe I don't like the color of the car. Like I did a white Ferrari and I was like, how am I going to make it interesting? White is a dull color. But then he happened to mention that where he worked, there was an office that with its own little waterfall. So I parked it in front of the waterfall and lots of little spurts of white water in the background. Sometimes
Perfect.
you'd even have to do it twice. And then another thing was commissions, people don't like to get up early. I said, well, I'd like to be up at 6 a.m. when the sun comes up. I mean, they don't understand the middle of the day is the worst time to shoot a car.
Yeah, you got to get that sweet light going on.
And by the way, I do different cars in different categories. This is the rarest category. This is called Art Deco Streamline Modern with the E on the end of modern to make it very French. And the French just love this smooth airflow cars around 36 to 39. Then unfortunately the war came along. Then after the war, the economy was so whacked out of shape that nobody had the money to buy one of these. So it's just this golden era. That's a Bugatti. I think this one's in a museum in the valley, San Fernando Valley. And then I do sports cars of the 60s, like Ferrari short wheelbase 250 GT. I like to do a car with the atmosphere behind it. Now, sometimes I wish I could have the right background behind the right car, but it just doesn't turn out that way. Sometimes the great picture of the car, great lighting, but there's a tractor trailer behind it, a Peterbilt. I want to be real, but I don't want to be that real. I want people to enjoy the nostalgia of the car. So then I've done a lot back, I said, when the Marry Me Fly free days, I took pictures all over the world so I can combine one thing with another. And sometimes nature, but like Villa d'Este is a good place to shoot, but I don't know how you get in the show now. That's the famous Concours in Italy, Lake Como. But I don't know who you have to be to get in it or whether they'll give me a trespass.
So back to your Bizzarini or whatever that is in Paradise Cove. That actually wasn't taken at Paradise Cove.
No, that was.
It was.
That's the weird thing about that car. My favorite car, the one that converted me from a poet to a writer. So I went to Paradise Cove when Andy Cohen, who used to have Beverly Hills Motoring Accessories, he started that very exclusive show there. You had to be invited to it. So I went there at 7 o'clock in the morning waiting for the first car. And out of all the cars in the world, only 150 or so made, comes my favorite car by itself. So I shot that.
Yeah, I remember that show really well. It was always a fun show to go to. He always had the greatest cars. I really miss him and I miss that event. That was a lot of fun.
Some people do a car with a white background, but when you do that, you deny all the pleasure of relating to the environment. Like I have another one with Paris, and I don't know how to pronounce it. I don't know French, but there's some restaurant called Les Deux Magots. It sounds to me like it's saying the two maggots. But anyhow, people have come up to me and say, I've eaten in that restaurant. I sat at that table. So it brings a whole lot to it when you have the atmosphere. And even this Bizzarini one is in a beach called Paradise Cove. So a lot of people have been to Malibu, but they didn't know there's this place called Paradise Cove. But if you ever watch the movie, the TV show Rockford Files, that's where his house trailer was.
Don just finished rewatching it for the 100th time. So yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, by the way, this is called gallery wrap. When you have the canvas wrap around, you don't have to bother to get a frame or anything. This is another short wheelbase Ferrari in Pasadena. Again, Ferraris on Colorado Boulevard.
How long does it take you to create one of these near photorealistic paintings?
It usually takes me like a week or so to do it. It's a lot of back and forth work. I do it on paper first, then I get a canvas done. Then I embellish the canvas.
What are we looking at? Is it paint on canvas?
Yeah, paint on canvas, but it's a print underneath made from my original paint of acrylic oil on paper. Those are very inexpensive to do. The paper is very special. I discovered it by accident. It's called linen, Linen. If you look at it real close, it looks like cloth.
So you're designing them on a computer and then printing them on linen?
No, I'm taking a picture with my camera at all these events I go to. I have thousands of pictures.
Oh.
I have maybe 100, 150 paper prints and only a few canvas ones. So I'm looking for a gallery that wants to put them on consignment. And I've actually sold them to museums or big collectors that have 100 cars. I'll say, oh, pick one of my cars. Okay, I'll take that one. So I've had a dealer say, I don't want it because it's not original. But this is the only one that, I don't know, because of glass, if you'll be able to see it, but this is an American hot rod. And I very rarely have people, because you don't often have people that look like models that look like just right for that car. So here's kind of a dumpy looking guy, but he's looking at like a 32 Ford hot rod with a supercharger on it, Pomona. And I like it because it's real people doing real things. But then sometimes I think, what if I do people and the people don't come out right? I've ruined all the work doing the car. That's kind of what I'm trying to capture in my paintings. But, I admire so many artists for what they could do. And I think I got my own little area to work in. One of my favorites was Ken Dallison, a British artist. And ironically, when I was writing Chevy ads, they hired him to come in and draw some of the cars. So it's like, it's a big world, but we run into each other.
Wally, one thing I've noticed in listening to your stories is it sounds like everywhere you go, you have the luck or the fortune of running into car people.
Yeah, a lot of times I don't know who they are. Kind of like movie stars. I don't know who they are till later. And somebody says, oh, didn't you recognize Giugiaro? It's like, that is a problem. But one was meeting the people I did in Detroit. Being a journalist, I'm interviewing people all the time, even if I have no reason to. I'm not writing a story, but, somebody waiting in a restaurant line, I'll get down to, where's the best place to fish in New Orleans.
So when you look back at both of your careers as a writer and as an artist, what moments over the last 50 years would you consider defining chapters for you and in the automotive world?
I want to say one thing about art in general, though. Since I became an artist, I appreciate nature a lot more. I don't go out and paint nature, but I remember looking at this tree in some doctor's front office yard and thinking, God, that's fascinating. Look at those roots. The roots are outside the ground. And I thought, before 2009, I would have never noticed that. And so colors, sunsets, color of water, the feel of cloth, the whole world's become more exciting since I rediscovered art.
And I'll refine that by saying, since you've witnessed so much of automotive history, you've lived through, I'll give examples, from across the autosphere. Let's say the death of Ayrton Senna to, the arrest of John DeLorean and everything in between. Are there standout moments as a witness to automotive history that have resonated with you and maybe changed you as a person?
One very recent one was I went to Monterey, and again, got to get up early in the morning. I was out there at Laguna Seca about 7 in the morning, empty parking lot. Suddenly a Ferrari SR2 shows up. That's a real rare car, SP being special project. They're 2 or 3 million a piece, and they have another version, SR1, with no windshield and only one seat. And anyhow, one shows up, then another one, then another one. Suddenly I'm in the middle of a parking lot of 20 or 30 of them. I thought there couldn't be that many in the whole world, but they're all gunning their engines. And then I thought, I wonder if these people have racing licenses or they just bought a $2 million car and Ferrari waved the green flag. But anyhow, they went out in the track and I got a picture of that and made 1 or 2 paintings of them. And that's like a moment you couldn't plan that, to be there at the right time when that many show up in one place. And Ferrari does that a lot. They have these private race course events only for owners. And to buy the car, there's all kinds of things. You can't customize it. If you own a recent model SP Ferrari and you say, well, I'm going to put my doggy's picture on the hood, they won't sell you another one. So that's really a marketing story in itself, how they got to that point.
Let me ask you something from one writer to another. What words of wisdom for both aspiring automotive writers or artists can you share? What would you espouse upon people trying to make it in the art world or the journalism world?
I've met a lot of artists by joining these art associations. And by the way, if you join them, as long as you pay the dues, you can submit your work and they'll put your work in the local show. So you get the first time experience of having your work in a show. The public looks at it. And by the way, one other thing I like about fine art is when I had a painting in the Monterey Mecum auction, I didn't stay around to find out what it sold for. I couldn't afford another night in a hotel. So I drive home, called them up. They said, "Oh yeah, we sold that for $1,400." And I thought, oh my God, in the writing field, you'd have to sell a hell of a lot of books at $1.50 royalty to make that money. And here I made it in one day, That's the last thing that the rules makers haven't determined is how much is art worth. That was a case where two people wanted to buy that painting. They kept bidding. I tell them if they're really good at one particular subject, like they do outdoor scenes, but they're really good at horses, I say develop that as a substrata of your work and become known as the horse artist. And then you'll get those people inviting you to their events. So that's what I've become, even though some of the cars I paint, nobody wants a picture like the Bizzarini. I've written a couple of stories about that. 10 paintings of cars that nobody knows what the car is. But anyhow, now writing, I don't know, I'm so scared of AI. I've had AI pop up on my computer and say, "Oh, would you like a story on this?" And all you have to do is give them the first line. And, the evolution of the Model A Ford, the machine takes over and does the writing. I wouldn't recommend somebody go into just journalistic writing. They'll have to do some specialty that the computer can't push them out of the way.
Yeah, I think that's a big fear with a lot of writers is AI is coming about. In fact, it's interesting right now there are tech companies that are hiring writers and English professors, et cetera, who teach AI how to write better, how to better research. It's incredible.
Yeah, I've seen the ads. And then in the art field too, right now there's a new TV series. I can't remember the title of it, but the beautiful female star doesn't exist at all. She's just
Yes.
a creation. I thought, what are they going to do when she has to go to the Oscars or something to get a prize? Send a robot up on stage?
Hey, they might.
At least she'll never age. Look at it that way.
Well, with that, Wally, we've reached that part of the episode where I like to invite our guests to share any shout outs, thank yous, promotions, or anything else that we haven't covered thus far.
I'd like to hear from an art gallery that wants to try out my art. I'll send you some paper ones at no cost. You put it up there and hope that you find a market in your town and that it's a good price, because maybe it's not so good a price in, even two towns like Fort Bragg, California is only 5 miles from Mendocino, but in Mendocino you get 10 times the money. But the thing is, I'll give you my email address. This is all I can do. It's mendoart7, MENDO, art, ART, number 7, gmail.com. And if you got a brick and mortar store, write me and I'll send you some pictures and you could choose some.
Now, do you have your own radio show?
Yes, I do. KUCR. Actually, my co-host has an assumed name on the show, I think, because he has so many shows. But anyhow, I've had that show for over 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Once a week, we've changed the format of what's covered a lot because you can't help it. I mean, when there's these crises like the electric cars were coming on and everybody had to go electric and they were going to ban internal combustion. And now suddenly a lot of automakers said, yeah, we went electric. Look what happened. Nobody bought it. And then I was doing more testing of test cars than I do now. So the thing is that we have to evolve with the times. And I'm still nostalgic for the old cars. So it's like I'm torn between the two. It's kind of like they're saying, we have a new movie just shot in 2026. I could come see it and say, well, I don't know. They're going to show an old Humphrey Bogart movie over here. I'd kind of like to see that.
In the end, Wally reminds us that a life in the automotive world isn't always a straight road. Sometimes it's a series of unexpected turns, one that can take you from the pages of MotorTrend to the quiet focus of a studio. From interviewing legends to becoming one in your own right, his journey shows that reinvention isn't a departure from who you were, but an expression of who you can be.
So whether through words or through paint, Wally has spent decades capturing the soul of the machines we love and the people who shape them. And as he continues creating from his home in San Bernardino, his story stands as proof that passion doesn't fade, it just finds new forms. And with that, Wally, I can't thank you enough for coming on Break Fix and sharing your story with us. And please keep chasing those stories, the stories that move you and move the rest of us as we look at your photographs, at your paintings, and read your words.
Thank you.
The following episode is brought to us in part by Garage Style Magazine. Since 2007, Garage Style Magazine has been the definitive source for car collectors, continually delivering information about automobilia, petroliana, events, and more. To learn more about the annual publication and its new website, be sure to follow them on social media at Garage Style Magazine or log on to www.garagestylemagazine.com. Because after all, what doesn't belong in your garage?
We hope you enjoyed another awesome episode of Break Fix Podcast, brought to you by Grand Touring Motorsports. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or get involved, be sure to follow us on all social media platforms at Grand Touring Motorsports. And if you'd like to learn more about the content of this episode, be sure to check out the follow-on article at gtmotorsports.org. We remain a commercial-free and no annual fees organization through our sponsors, but also through the generous support of our fans, families, and friends through Patreon. For as little as $2.50 a month, you can get access to more behind-the-scenes action, additional Pitstop minisodes, and other VIP goodies, as well as keeping our team of creators fed on their strict diet of Fig Newtons, gummy bears, and Monster. So consider signing up for Patreon today at www.patreon.com/GT Motorsports. And remember, without you, none of this would be possible.